Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Sometimes you want to play a game that's cinematic, and you need a system that maybe supports being cinematic more than something like old school Dungeons and Dragons. So today I'm going to talk to you about my first impressions about the Ubiquity game system and being cinematic. And because a lot of the games that use that system are rather pulpy and cinematic in nature, although not all of them, and you don't necessarily have to use it for that. It could be used for a lot of different genres or ideas. And I'm looking at my bookcase, and something came to me. And I'm usually not a fan of playing in an established world that would be like from a book or movie or TV show or whatever. But I was looking right, and there it was, little Farscape. Be kind of cool to play in a setting like that. So let's talk about being cinematic without the cinematic glasses, shall we? Because I'll go bananas. Anyhow, it's not surprising if you watch my channel that I like old school D&D. I tend to, gravitate towards like things like BX, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, basic fantasy role-playing game. So I kind of filter, whatever game I look at through that filter because I've had it for a long time. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but so how does a grognard look at something like Ubiquity? And now there's a lot of games that use that system, like Hollow Earth Expedition, which I think was the first one, Desolation, Leagues of Adventure, All for One, Regime Diabolique, which sounds really cool, Space 1889, Quantum Black, and I'm sure there's others that I'm forgetting. I don't actually have physical product in hand yet, although I've ordered myself some Ubiquity dice. I'll get to what those are. You don't need them. And also the hard copies of some games. However, the freak stuff I've checked it online, and I've listened to Runeslinger's videos and actually talked to Anthony about the game more than once. The stuff you can get on Exile games, you can get some pre-gen characters from the various core books and supplements, so you get an idea what a character looks like, and also some free RPG Day stuff. And those are kind of like quick starts and give you like a pretty good idea, not everything, but like how the system works. So let me take a look at it. I mean, I like the system here, like flat out, like this is the spoiler. I'm really a fan of the system, and parts of it I didn't think I was going to be, but I am. So the game uses 6 primary attributes, and it's a point-buy system, and the primary attributes are the same attributes as you use in D&D, so it's kind of cool. 2 of them have different names. There's one called Body, which is analogous to your Constitution. There's another one which is called Willpower, which is analogous to Wisdom, and we tended to use it as Willpower anyway. These scores range from 1 to 5, and every time I talk about a score and an attribute or a secondary attribute or a skill, these scores mean the number of dice you're going to add to a die pool when you roll to do something. And the dice are binary dice. They're yes, no, pass, fail. So you can use any kind of die and just use evens for pass and odds for fail. You can use special Ubiquity dice, which they're D8s, but as there's different colors and they mimic rolling 2 dice or 3 dice at a time, so you don't have to roll a big giant handful of dice. So they're pretty darn cool. So anyhow, let's go back to this these primary attributes. It's a point buy, so you use 15 points to spread around. The average person has a score of 2. So it really kind of mimics to me like how we really honestly played, something like BXD and D. You generally didn't have characters with these scores of 3 or 4 or 5. So the way I wrap my head around it, to use an analogy, is like if you have a score of 1, you're below average. So I'm thinking, well, that's a score of 6 to 8 in D&D. You have a score of 2, that's like having a 9 through 12. If you got a score of 3, that's like having a 13 through 15. A score of 4 would be something like you're exceptional. You got a 16 or 17. And a score of 5 is like you're unbelievable. The pinnacle of human ability. And it would be analogous to having an 18. So that's how I wrap my head around it. Now there's definitely archetypes and ways you want to design your character, or you can design your character out. However, I like random generation, and I was just on a lark. I was thinking, well, how about you assign a number to each one of these primary stats, because there's 6 of them. Take 3 6-sided dice and roll them and see if you add extra points, because you put 2 in every attribute, and then see what else you come up with. So let's see, what do I got? I got a 4, 5, and a 6. So I guess let me see, what would that be? That would be I guess the mental stats. So intelligence, willpower, and charisma. I got 3 in all those stats, but you can do whatever way you want to. That was just kind of like a, haha, that would be kind of neat. Anyhow, then derived from those primary stats, you've got a bunch of secondary stats. And attributes are called, not stats. Now, one's called size, which is not derived from those, and that's the default size is 0, because that's what a human being is. And if you have a negative size or a positive size, that might be like a monster or something, or even machines, or an exceptionally tiny or big human, then you have, your modifiers change, which means your die pool changes, either positively or negatively. Your move, these are all very intuitive. Move is based on adding dexterity and strength. They're not averages, they're additive, because these are your die pools. Perception is intelligence plus willpower. Initiative is dexterity plus intelligence. Defense, which is analogous to armor class, is body plus dexterity. Although it's a die pool you roll, and it's an opposed roll in combat. I'm not going to get to that. You can watch Moonslinger's videos. Health is body plus willpower, and I like the fact that willpower is involved in that. That's analogous to hit points, and so if you get knocked down to below 0, you're unconscious. If you get down to -5, you are dead. There's something called stun, which is just equal to your body, which is con, if you remember. And if you get hit down to like below, if you take one blow does more than your stun rating, then you're stunned for a round. If it does more than twice, you're actually knocked unconscious for a while. And then in some games, I have a secondary stat called sanity, which is adding your will and your charisma. And I think there's a few other secondary stats depending on what game it is, but you can go on and on. Anyhow, then you got 15 points to spread around in skills. So it's very familiar, to some versions of D&D. And it's very intuitive. It's like, okay, what do you want your character to be good at? At the end of the day, when you go and have a task you've got to do, well, it's got a difficulty. It's not surprising. This is normal, for gaming. And so that you sit there and think, well, how many dice do I get to roll for this? And be like, say you're doing something that would be, dexterity based. Okay, well, I'm going to use my dexterity. And then rating. So maybe I got a 3 in dexterity, and then I've got some skills that dovetail off of that are relevant to this task. So I got to figure out how many do I get to add up to have a die pool to roll against this task. Now let's go, for sake of example, you've got a task that's 5. It's difficulty of 5. You need 5 successes. Now, one of the things you can do, which is interesting about this game, is you can take the average. The game master has the option to say, you know what, this isn't a really cinematic, epic, or crucial moment, so you can take the average of what your die pool roll would have been and use that. So if you've got a 10 die pool, well, the average number of successes you're going to get in that is going to be a 5. So that the game master can say, you know what, take the average, you succeed. Now, here's where it gets tricky, and the die pool, it gets really important. And I kind of dig this. I didn't think I was going to, but I like it. Unlike a linear D20 roll, the die pool is like a bell curve. It's not the sharpest in the world, but it's a little sharp. And the idea is, it mimics performing at your level of competence for the most part. Most cases, you've got that 10 die pool, you're going to perform at like a 5. I think, the average roll, depending, on the die pool size, is high 50s to high 60s. In this case, a 10 die pool, you're going to roll a 5 if you roll it 62% of the time. However, after a few more levels of difficulty, your chances drop precipitously. And just to give you an example, if you've got this 10 die pool and you're trying to do something that's got a difficulty of 4, well, you're going to succeed 83% of the time. By the time it's 3, it's 94.5% of the time. You're going to succeed at this thing. However, if you've got a task that's a difficulty of 6 with your 10 die pool, you got a 38% chance. 7, 18% chance. 8, 5.5. You need more dice. You need more dice. So how do you get more dice? Because it's very important in this game to get more dice. So first one's really intuitive and really familiar. What you want modifiers. You want to do things that give you tactical advantage. And the game has tons of little crunchy bits, to figure out, okay, so you're in combat, so maybe you fight aggressively, maybe you take time to aim, maybe you get the high ground, etc. Those sort of things. And I'm talking to Moonslinger and said, well, how long does it take to get a real feel for like applying those modifiers? And he said it's about the same as any other game. After a while, you get a feel for assigning difficulties and assigning modifiers based on tactical things, because just bigger die pool. But how else do you get them? Well, you can use your style points. And what the hell are style points? And so let's go back to character generation for a second. Not only in character generation are you coming up with abilities and attributes and skills, you also come up with a few other things. You pick an archetype. What do you want your character to be like? Do you want him to be like Indiana Jones, like his adventurer? Do you want him to be like a warrior? Do you want him to be like, some kind of occult investigator? Depending on the genre. Then you come up with a motivation. It's generally like one word, like what motivates your character, what generally drives them. And the motivation is important, so remember that. You can choose a talent, and there's a whole list of them. They're not quite exactly like feats, but there's something that sets you apart, and generally they have some kind of mechanical advantage. You can be accurate, and sometimes you can add more levels to this, over time with experience points. You can choose a resource in some cases, and this would be something like, do you have a mentor? Do you have a secret lair? Do you have, a cash flow? Do you have, other social contexts, things, and this would be more important in a campaign type setting. And then you pick a flaw, and the flaw generally has some kind of mechanical disadvantage, and it could be something where like you're nearsighted, or you're timid, or you seem to be a danger magnet, whatever it is. There's quite a few comical ones. Now, you start at every adventure for the most part with three 3 style points. And you want these style points because you can trade in a clutch situation, you can trade these style points in on a one-to-one basis for extra dice. So if you've got that situation where, like, you have to roll an 8 and you've got this 10 die pool, well, you want a lot more dice because you don't want a 5.5% chance. You want some big giant die pool, like a 18, 20 die pool. You can use trading style points on a one-to-one basis to get extra up to 10 more dice on one of these rolls. You can also use them on a 2-to-1 basis to mitigate damage. A different story. I'm not going to talk about that. We'll just go with this die pool. So I want more style points. Where do you get them? Well, you get them for role-playing your character according to their motivation and according to their flaw. And when you do that, the game master has the ability to say, hey, that was really good. Here's some more style points that you can spend in a clutch situation. And then you get to trade these suckers in at a clutch moment. And these represent, unlike, I don't really like a lot of games where they're like you're kind of fudging, or it's a fate point, or it's a luck or that kind of thing. However, this has a much different mojo. I didn't think I was going to like this, but I actually really do. Using style points represents those moments where you're exerting yourself above and beyond your normal capabilities. You're pushing yourself to the limit. This is cinematic. This is that do or die moment where your character is and think of whatever movie, Die Hard, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Farscape, whatever, where you're just going above and beyond. And it's that I can't believe he did that moment. Because you need dice to do that. You need to use style points. So I really dig that sort of mojo that the game has with that. And the other question I had for Anthony when I'm talking at Runeslinger is, okay, I get the mechanical point, however, how long does it take to really get a feel for handing out style points as a game master, where you're not being too miserly, but at the same point you're not being indiscriminate and just kind of showering them with style points, and it becomes a Monty Hall kind of campaign for style points. And the other thing that I saw coming is like, well, okay, how long does it really take like a group of players to not just act like little dogs doing tricks, playing up their motivations and their flaws, to say, hey, give me a treat, come on, I want another style point, I need style points. And it takes a little while, a few sessions, it depends on not surprisingly, it depends on the group of players, but I was glad for his experience. I tell you what, he turned me on to this Ubiquity game system, and I have to spend a lot more money now, and so it's his fault, so he better freaking help me. So that's it. That is my first impression. I will certainly talk about the other games as I get them. I have Desolation coming in the mail relatively soon. Got some Ubiquity dice coming in the mail. You don't need them, but they make it a little bit easier. You're rolling less dice. But I'm pretty pumped about this. And to be honest with you, I'm really hard on systems. I like what I like, and so and we've talked about, or I've talked about, I guess you said something about the fact that I like things that are simple and easy and intuitive. And this is simple, easy, and intuitive, and definitely supports a cinematic and pulpy style of play. And even as you look at it, supports probably just about anything. So I'm really digging the system. Will I completely abandon things like Lamentations of the Flame Princess? Of course not. But hey, you can teach an old dog new tricks and be a little cinematic, and so Ubiquity, pretty freaking cool.